And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and on each head was written a blasphemous name. Revelations 13:1 is perhaps all you really need to know about what Longlegs aims to accomplish, and I'm speaking more about the character himself than what the story is ultimately about. As writer-director Osgood Perkins told Deadline, when a profound presence such as Longlegs or any prolific serial killer he's based on remains unseen and unknown, hidden in the shadows and behind cryptic babble that's difficult to decipher, much like God or more fittingly the devil, that's truly what gives them their power. Their actions may instill fear, but it's our cultural obsession with mythologizing their existence that effectively makes who they are seem more powerful and impactful than what is physically true. That is to say, while it isn't necessarily an incorrect assumption to perceive the titular villain Longlegs as an omnipotent force of evil, given how he's greatly mythologized in both the marketing and the film's initial setup, when you finally strip him of his monstrous mystique and shatter the folkloric illusion around him, the reality is far less complicated and compelling in the way you're led to believe. For the uninitiated, Longlegs tells the story of an ambiguously clairvoyant detective called Lee Harker, who is assigned by her superior William Carter to investigate a string of family murder-suicides perpetrated by each father spanning over a 30-year period. However, while the tragedies seem like open-shut cases on the surface, what's left the police perpetually baffled is the discovery of coded letters left at each crime scene by an elusive man who calls himself Longlegs, who they believe has an unexplainable influence over the killings. The twist, of course, in typical Oz Perkins fashion, is that Harker soon believes that Longlegs is seemingly in cahoots with the fucking devil, as her search becomes overshadowed by a literal demonic presence. As we get into it, like most of my videos, I highly recommend watching the film for yourself before going any further, because I'm not going to be giving a strict beat-for-beat summary of the plot, so most of what I will talk about will be spoiling the film outright. So if you're still here, you've been warned. Now, just before we dive into the myth, this video is sponsored by Raycon. Look, I am a sucker for sequels, reboots, and legacy comebacks. Doom, The Dark Ages, Death Stranding 2, 28 Years Later, Final Destination Bloodlines, and heck, even I Know What You Did Last Summer. However, you know what else is back and better than ever? Raycon's fan-favorite everyday earbuds classic, now with active noise cancellation. These bad boys pack 8 hours of playtime and a 32-hour battery life with practical and comfortable in-ear fit and premium audio quality that rivals all the big audio brands you know and love at half the price. I use Raycon earbuds every single day when at the gym, shopping for groceries, walking my doggo Cheddar, enjoying my morning coffee, lounging around the house, and most of all, traveling for work. With the addition of active noise cancellation at the press of a button, Raycon Everyday Earbuds Classic allows me to tune out all the noise around me and immerse myself in audio greatness to help take the tedium out of day-to-day activities and make each day more pleasurable. If I'm not vibing out to Turnstile in the fruit and vegetable aisle or listening to Last Podcast on the Left on a plane, I'm probably sinking into my couch while watching the new season of Dexter. Raycon has received tens of thousands of 5-star reviews, so if you want to get the most out of your audio listening experience, simply go to buyraycon.com/Ryan to get 20% off the fan favorite Everyday Earbuds Classic today. If there is one thing that everyone can undoubtedly take away from Oz Perkins' 2024 Satanic Panic psychological horror Longlegs, is that it had one absolutely stellar marketing campaign. The problem, of course, is that hype is a double-edged sword. You want to feel excitement for a film, but it comes at the cost of your expectations clouding your judgment of the finished product. I say this because everyone I've spoken to who has seen Longlegs, especially those who had limited interest in the genre but were sold by the marketing have said they either liked it or felt very disappointed in it. It seems that the audience consensus is pretty divisive overall, especially when you get to the third and final act, and I myself ended up kind of in the middle. My summarized feelings before we get into it are that I love the intense atmosphere, visual style, and most of the outcome, but felt the detective angle was a little superfluous when most of the mystery was resolved inconsequentially when the story simply decided it was time to explain itself. It's structured with the same aggressive foreshadowing and misdirection that Perkins used in his utterly engrossing demonic psychological thriller The Blackcoat's Daughter, where timelines and events are recontextualized when new information is revealed, thus framing a rather simple story like a jigsaw puzzle that makes more sense when you find all the missing pieces. That said, call it me making excuses for a style over substance script, but in retrospect, given where the story of Longlegs ends up, I question if it actually underplays itself by design. I want to make the argument that the marketing deliberately works in tandem with the film's themes of mythology by externally emphasizing the film's broodingly oppressive and hauntingly cryptic atmosphere, only for the film to internally and surprisingly punctuate itself with grungy and pulpy qualities. That's because Perkins acknowledged in multiple interviews that he never explicitly intended Longlegs to have a stone-cold serious tone, but rather one that seemed to reflect the sensibilities and personality of its titular antagonist. Without giving away too much just yet, whether intentional or not, choosing to sell Longlegs as this enigmatic, menacing, powerful force of evil works in favor of the film's subversion of that expectation when it's ultimately revealed that Longlegs is apparently a washed-up glam rocker. The marketing and subsequent press heavily avoided showing actor Nicolas Cage in heavy makeup to evoke, or rather mythologize, the impression that there was something so incomprehensibly scary and disturbing about him, only for the film to show you his face almost immediately in the opening and demystify the horror by intention. That's not to say he isn't frightening when it matters. He's certainly dangerous and violent, but going back to what I said at the start, when you strip him of his myth and thus his perceived power, he's nothing more than a simple pawn to the devil, and as the final act reveals, isn't even the only pawn in the story. In an unusual yet fitting comparison, Perkins told Deadline Longlegs isn't much different than Darth Vader. To paraphrase, he's a central mythological character with monstrous presence and power, but when the mask is off, he's a sad, scarred dad, a pathetic, shriveled up white dude. Both are true, he can be scary and sad in equal measures. The point the film ultimately makes, much to many people's understandable disappointment, is that Longlegs isn't the boogeyman you hype him up to be in your mind. He's a pathetic glam rock loser who literally lives in a basement. Again, he's still a palpable threat, but he isn't this all-knowing, all-seeing entity you're lulled into perceiving. In reality, the reveal is intentionally lesser than the sum of its parts. His entire aura is given to him by others, not because he cultivated it for himself. In fact, early in the story, Carter compares him to Charles Manson, a field rock star who did not technically kill anyone, but inspired a fearful satanic cult into doing his bidding, which Harker assumes is how Longlegs operates. While Perkins is openly indebted to Silence of the Lambs as it serves as the core inspiration for the story, the structure is similar to David Fincher's Seven and the Zodiac killings, with how the killer uses biblical fallacy to present himself as high and mighty, when really he's just some random narcissist whose cryptically coded messages to taunt the police are nothing more than vapid nonsense to appear cunning and intelligent. One could argue Longlegs not only demystifies its villain, but also de-romanticizes our cultural obsession with true crime by explicitly ensuring the perpetrator doesn't receive the folkloric legacy they desperately crave, which echoes Perkins' comments to Deadline that he finds true crime abhorrent and disinteresting. All of this is perfectly consolidated near the end of Act 2 when Longlegs is unceremoniously arrested while casually waiting for a bus to leave town. Not only is his arrest mundane and pathetically uninspired, echoing the arrests of most infamous real-life heinous serial killers who simply drop their guard out of hubris, but during interrogation, where he reveals his real name is Deal Coble, it vividly demonstrates the subtext when he claims his deeds are done. Seeing his freeze frame on the television as the police struggle with their next move visually suggests he's already mythologized himself in the minds of everyone involved. He set himself up for martyrdom, and there's nothing the police can do when he cements that legacy with one last disturbing cherry on top by bashing his head against a stone table, killing himself, and leaving Harker traumatized and the police completely baffled. Now, there are a number of plot details we need to address to get us to where things end up in the final act, but of course, as I'm sure many of you have been waiting for, we firstly need to talk about Osgood Perkins and his constant fixation on his childhood. To be honest, having made a video on every Oz Perkins film and reading so much about him, I'm at the point where I know more about this guy and his family than I probably do my own. As I said in my recent video on the monkey, as well as in pretty much every other Perkins film I've covered, in the Oz Perkins cinematic universe, generational trauma and family tragedy are common themes amongst almost every character, and are drawn from Perkins' own personal life experiences. For example, setting the film in the 90s was Perkins' way to reflect on his own turbulent transition into adulthood and all the chaos and uncertainty that came with it. Lee Harker is essentially explained by Perkins as an embodiment of his own conflicted upbringing, as her character is established as reserved and isolated from having lost touch with her childhood due to amnesia. She never outwardly ruminates on it, but the internal nuances and mannerisms in her performance convey a character who's not entirely sure who she is or what she wants, which is reinforced in a scene where she tells Carter's daughter she had no intention of being in the police force, but simply fell into it. It shows a self-inflicted lack of choice in her life, which is only compounded by her strict attachment to her disturbed and mentally ill mother, whom we'll come back to shortly. While promoting the monkey, Perkins told Vulture it was as if his storytelling was a way to rectify what he felt he understood about his past, which is a key component to Harker's own journey when it becomes evident early in the story she may have some connection to Longlegs. In the film's second half, Harker's vague, ambiguous clairvoyance begins to fall into place when it seems she's able to channel the satanic presence that Longlegs is working with, but gradually it comes at the cost of unearthing startling revelations about her past. I mentioned this several months back in my video on the Clovehitch Killer, but the film evokes similar qualities to the 1988 Dutch thriller The Vanishing, where the investigation becomes less about who or what the killer is, and more about questioning if this is a path worth exploring if you know it will cost you a fraction of your humanity. In the case of Harker, she eventually uncovers the most uncanny porcelain dummy ever put to screen, which they discover contains a mysterious metallic ball that appears to emit a demonic signal. It seems to trigger Harker into inhabiting the doll to discover Longlegs is not only its creator, but he named it after the sole surviving victim of the 30 years of family massacres called Carrie Ann Camera, who is now institutionalized. Harker learns that Longlegs visited Carrie Ann in the institution under Harker's name, which the doctors found took her out of her catatonic state, which she later insinuates to Harker is because she's under Longlegs' influence. There's a lot of talk throughout the story about living in a black, empty void of darkness, a limbo to be exact, which explains how the devil possesses the families and specifically the father into committing murder as if they're all puppets, which is triggered by the mysterious metallic ball inside the dolls that are made in the image of each family's daughter. This is where the movie will greatly divide people. In The Black Coat's Daughter, it's entirely up to interpretation whether the demonic stuff is real or not, but in Longlegs, it explicitly confirms that there are in fact supernatural forces at play. Yes, Longlegs is still ultimately just some guy, but the devil is very much real and wishes to spread corruptive influence because fuck you, that's why. The devil doesn't need to justify itself to you. I'm very mixed on this because on the one hand, I'm a sucker for ambiguity and think that the reveal partially undermines the demystification of Longlegs. However, on the other hand, you could see it as a sort of paradoxical double bluff where, because the film is so grounded and demystifying, there's no way in hell anyone would believe the supernatural stuff is real, thus they become surprised, thus it acts as its own subversion? Nonetheless, it takes us to Perkins' grand theme, which is when Harker remembers her past after discovering old Polaroids in her childhood bedroom that reveal she was the young girl Longlegs confronted in the opening, and her mother, Ruth, is working for him. This, in turn, explains her mother's mental illness, where Longlegs forced Ruth to pose as a nun and deliver his dolls to various families on behalf of the devil, because if she refused, Longlegs would kill her daughter. A major element of this discovery reflects on the notion that Harker's mother raised her under a religiously oppressive household and locked her in the values she was never allowed to question because that's just the rules she was taught to live by as a kid. It's dangling in front of your face the entire film that Longlegs was living for 20 years in Harker's mother's fucking basement, hence their direct connection that Harker's clairvoyance was constantly trying to tell her from the very start. There's a double meaning in Longlegs singing a song to a young Harker that refers to both him and the devil by letting him in so he can come and go as he pleases and being Mr. Downstairs, where the basement and hell are one and of the same. This takes us back to good old Perkins, who explained to Deadline that similar to how Longlegs and Darth Vader can be both scary and sad, to quote, a mother can be both the creative and destructive force, the equilibrium of good and evil. In my video on the monkey, I explained how Perkins' parents held secrets to protect him and his brother during childhood. His mother specifically withheld the fact that their father was a closeted homosexual who had an affair during his marriage and later died of complications with AIDS in 1992, the date of which originally being when the film was set. I don't think I can put it into better words than Ryan Latanzio of IndieWire, who summarized the film as an ode to the precarious secret his mother maintained, and the generational tension that bloomed out of lying for a long time to her children about her husband's sexual identity. As Perkins then consolidated, a mother can lie, and she can lie out of love. Sometimes the painful and destructive force that bleeds out is a necessary evil to protect your children. Perkins doesn't see Ruth's actions as morally questionable to her because, as a parent, Ruth is doing what she has to do for her one and only daughter. It leads to unimaginable tragedy, yes, but when you see it from her perspective, it comes at no cost to what matters most to her and protecting her daughter. Upon confronting her, Ruth destroys Harker's doll, seemingly freeing Harker from the curse, but also her blessing of clairvoyance, triggering a climax of Harker realizing Carter's family are the next targets, only to arrive too late, forcing her to kill Carter before shooting her own mother, and seemingly breaking the cycle. I took the mirror image of Harker screaming in Longlegs' car as she races to Carter's house as an implication that the devil wanted Harker to continue Longlegs' work as a replacement for her mother, but seeing Harker unable to destroy Carter's daughter's doll and instead leaving the house suggests that while she may be able to distance herself from the cycle, leaving the doll intact suggests that the devil's work is never done and its corruption will continue to exist. And 1 year later, that is my review of Longlegs. If you enjoyed the video, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you have any requests, please leave them as well. And until next time, hail Satan, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.